Okay, I'm here with Chris Locke, who's a real race car driver who uses simulation for practicing his racing. So Chris, what are your affiliations with racing?
Well, I've done club racing since 2003 with NASA, doing lots of sprint racing and enduros, and then between 2006 and 2008 I raced in the Grand Am ST class. Then it was called the Coney Challenge. Now it's called Continental Tire Challenge.
Okay, so you use simulation. Right now you're specifically using iRacing, but I would imagine what we're going to talk about is valid for other types of racing simulation as well. But why don't you just go ahead and tell me what your feelings are on the 3D Vision 3D simulation.
Sure. Jack at Trinity Racing had approached me on multiple occasions, trying to get me to buy into simulation as a tool for training for real racing. And I was already halfway in that camp because I had done some racing on the Sony system and done some PC racing. But at the time, when it was two-dimensional, it was more of a I don't want to say a toy, but it was more of a pastime. I had an interest in racing, so I really liked to play these card games. And they were games for me then. Until one day, Jack came to me and said, I have something new. Look at this simulation in 3D. And so I sat down, and the first thing that I thought when I put the glasses on and drove out onto the track, obviously I was amazed at seeing the 3D. Everyone likes to look at 3D images. But the first corner I went into, I found myself actually moving my head like I really do in a real race car. I was looking for the apex, and at that point I realized, hey, all this time doing the two-dimensional game, I really wasn't as immersed, and my body wasn't fooled, and my mind wasn't fooled that I was in a race car. I was playing an approximation of racing, and the 3D really changed that to where my brain was experiencing it as it really would in real life. So I could focus on the brake markers rather than just hitting the brakes. When I saw the 3 marker appear at a certain point of the screen, I could sense how quickly a brake marker was coming at me. A sensation.
So you're saying you actually felt those things coming at you?
Yeah. When you're doing two-dimensional, or when you're driving a two-dimensional sim, the sensation of speed is really something that you are sensing because you're watching something kind of move left or move to the right and down, because it's an isometric view, right? It's not. It's an approximation of depth.
Yeah, because it's flat.
So
right?
Your brain perceives it as that. And when you play a 2D game, you sit down and there's a certain amount of time where you're training yourself to pick up on, okay, what is speed in this image? How does this image translate to what I really know? And when you sit down for a 3D game, there is no translation. Your eyes and your brain are experiencing it just like they would in the real world. And you find yourself doing things like looking around corners. You find yourself looking over crests as you're driving and up hills. And
so I would imagine there's like some mathematics involved in your brain, what it's perceiving and that type of thing, like the depth in the real world that you're feeling in a three-dimensional environment.
Yeah, I mean your eyes obviously, and when your eyes focus on an object, that's what's giving you that sense of distance. And that sense of distance, as distance changes and you have to focus on something close and then focus on something far away, that change in distance is your perception of speed, your visual perception of speed.
So your brain is doing like a mathematics and trajectories.
Yeah. Your brain, that's how we've all learned, even in the real life, to know that an object is coming at us. Is because we're focusing on it, and our focus is changing. And in 2D, you don't have that because you're not changing focus on an object. It's moving left to right. The object's always in focus. on a 2D screen. But when you get into 3D, all of a sudden you find your brain actually being able to look at an object down track, changing the focus. You understand the distance, and it's much more natural, and it maps to, the parts of your brain that are used to experiencing the real world. So for me, the way that really turned the software from a game into a real simulation tool that I will use to improve my racing skills, is that it's no longer an approximation of the environment. It really is a three-dimensional environment as you would experience when you're actually sitting in the car. So braking points, apexes, the exits, other cars around you, there's a whole new level of the sensation of relative speed that you just can't get by simply putting 2D imaged pixels on the screen next to you. You just can't pick up on the nuances of speed like you can when it's 3D.
So how do you feel about sitting down in a driving simulation and running and practicing a track in something like iRacing? Does that put you closer to the track environment? Do you take that out on the track with you when you're driving?
Oh yeah, I mean, like I said, I've played a lot of different racing games, and then now these simulations that iRacing has, and the biggest thing that the 3D brought into it was that I really do lose myself now. I actually sometimes can't remember whether or not I'm sitting in a real car or whether I'm actually sitting in a simulator seat somewhere, and that's been the biggest plus, because I no longer, when I actually go to the real car, have this transition, or when I sit down and play a simulator, I no longer have to think, okay, well now I'm in a simulator, so I have to make these adjustments to my technique to suit it. The technique that I use in the simulator is the same technique that I use in the real race car. And now that the techniques and strategies are all one, then I can actually use the simulation as a viable tool for developing my technique for the racetrack.
Okay, so and it seems like as a race car driver, when you are on the track, you are obviously trying to go as fast as possible, get the lowest track time when you're making your laps. So when you are sitting in a simulator in a two-dimensional environment, is there something, and a three-dimensional environment, is there a difference between your brain's driving duties when you're in 2D as opposed to 3D? It seems like you would have to work harder to transform that world into 3D if it's not actually 3D.
Yeah, I mean, your brain, to me, one of the things that I found when I was doing two-dimensional racing is I was trying to do that approximation myself. It was, looking at a 2D environment and trying to sense speed, you are trying, your brain is going through this extra exercise of trying to translate what it sees into, the perception of distance and speed. And the 3D environment, your brain has been trained since you were a little baby to perceive distance and speed in the way it's being presented to you when you're driving in 3D. So that is something that your brain no longer has to do. It leaves you, it leaves brain cycles open to do other things when you're driving that will help you lower your lap times. And I myself have gone between the two environments, the same iRacing, very similar wheels between here at Trinity and at home, and I find that the 3D, just simply turning off the 3D, I lose about 0.8 of a second a lap, which is significant, almost a second a lap.
That's huge in racing, isn't it?
Yeah, it's huge. A second a lap is huge. And so, people in the real world will pay, hundreds of thousands of dollars to go a second faster. And so it's it really has, it's driven home the point to me that the 3D is, what's the word I'm looking for? It's driven home the fact that the 3D really is as real as it can be.
So it's like as immersive of an environment as you could possibly get without being in the car.
Yeah, and immersion's the key. Racing is about perception of your surroundings and perceiving them early, making appropriate decisions. So if you can't perceive speed and distance correctly, then your decisions could be wrong. You make more mistakes, and 3D has changed simulation so that now all those nuances are part of the experience.
Right. Okay. So now, and I see here, I'm looking at this Trinity racing frame where it's like it's an actual race seat and a frame, and it looks like you have the 3D vision. This is 3D right here, but this is a 3D vision surround where you actually have the three displays right next to each other, and it seems like this would even be more immersive. How do you feel about this in like a 2D display? If somebody just had the one display in 3D, it seems like that would be an advantage as well, even if they couldn't, say, afford the three displays yet.
Yeah, even one display in 3D is an advantage. Obviously, the
peripheral type of thing?
The peripheral displays are an advantage even in 2D, but I find that when I'm running in 2D with the peripheral displays, that my world kind of narrows down, and I'm really only focusing once again on the 2D display. Again, my brain is kind of shifting gears, saying, "Oh, now you're on 2D, so you have to do different things and key off of different visual cues to perceive speed." And then as soon as you turn it into 3D, I'm not doing that anymore. I'm just perceiving it naturally, and then I find that my eyes actually do start to drift out into the peripherals, and I can look out the side window of my car. And
you feel cars closer? Do you feel cars closer to you now, type thing, and can race closer?
You can race closer because you actually can use your peripheral vision like it was intended. Unlike if you're on a 2D screen, I can actually be looking out, out my side window. And I can still be perceiving motion just like you would, normally driving. You not only perceive motion, but you can perceive that distance. So even out of the side of your eye, you can perceive, you can perceive how quickly you're coming up on a car. So you can be tracking. You can be tracking like a car that you're racing close with, while at the same time you're looking at the next apex. So you can look at both of those things. In 2D, it's just very difficult to do because when you focus on another aspect of the screen and you're not focusing on the other object, all that speed data is just completely lost. At least for me, because you can't really track how the pixels are moving or growing anymore.
Right. Okay. So now when you have a car that's coming up next to you in these side displays, do you feel that car closer to you and further away? Can you race better and closer to them?
You can race. Like I was saying before, one of the biggest things when you're racing in 2D and you see a car in your side view, it's just this big blob of pixels, and it barely moves. There's barely any motion, so it's very hard to sense when that car is moving towards you and moving away. And when you're racing that close, just small movements, covering just inches, are huge. It means whether or not you hit the person or not. So when you go to 3D, one of the amazing things is that all of a sudden, these pixels don't have to move. They don't have to translate, through X or Y for you to perceive that something's happening. You literally, it starts to move, and your eyes, immediately try to focus on the object and sense, oh, this thing's drifting toward me. He's drifting slightly away. So you can sense those little nuances of speed, inches per second as opposed to hundreds of miles an hour are the only things you can perceive.
Great. Okay, Chris. Hey, I really appreciate you taking the time to tell us about the 3D and the 3D Vision Surround, and it sounds like I'm going to go get one. Thank you.